Two council members. Not how many? That's perfect. Oh, nice. That's perfect. And it's a public meeting, so. Great.
All right, I think we're ready to get started. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'd like to welcome Ron Vine. Ron is with the ETC Institute, and Ron recently completed our Community Needs Assessments survey, and he's here to present the results for us tonight. So he's going to be making a presentation, and then we'll certainly answer any questions that you might have. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ann. My name's Ron Vine. I'm a Senior Vice President with ETC Institute Leisure Vision, and it's been our pleasure to work with you. For some of you who have been around the city for a while, we also did a citizen survey for you about 8 or 9 years ago. And when I came back a few months ago, I just remembered, it's a beautiful building here, and I remembered it really well. So it's been a pleasure to come back. Please, generally, if no one asks a single question, which I hope you do, it would take about 25 minutes to run through these slides. So please, just at any point of time, just, ask me anything that you want, because this is really your night to understand this. But the agenda, really, there's 6 things we want to go through. We want to go through what was the purpose of the survey study, the methodology we used, and then we really look at a system in 3 ways. First, what about your current system? How do people use your current system? How satisfied are they with your current system? Then everybody who takes a survey basically is saying to you, this is the vision for our household for the future park system that best meets the needs of our household. And then last is funding the vision, and then questions. And really 4 purposes of the survey document. 1, to assess resident usage and satisfaction with city parks, recreation, services. To assess what we call needs, unmet needs, and priorities. And we're going to discuss, because I'm sure most of you have heard the term needs, and I'm sure all of you have heard the term priorities, but some of you maybe haven't heard the term unmet needs. And so we're going to talk about that, because in many ways that's more important than needs. We're going to talk about priorities, obviously, because both from the park board standpoint and city commission standpoint, it's all about priorities, because there's so many things, and you have, just so much in resources, and you have to, really look at those carefully. And then really to have defendable data. And I think that's really the key, because you want to involve your entire population, and that's what a statistically valid survey is all about. So what's the methodology that we use? Well, while I was on site, we met with the park board, we met with the steering committee, people working on your master plan, met with some other staff and consultants, people in the community, to talk about what are the key issues to ask on the survey questionnaire, because this survey had to be designed specifically for the city of Edina. It was about 8 pages long, including the cover letter. The survey took about 12 to 14 minutes to complete. We sent it to a random sampling of 3,000 households. People could take the survey either and send it back through the mail, or they could take it over the web. And if we didn't get enough surveys returned, we were going to do phone calling. Our goal was to complete 600 surveys. They were pouring in. I mean, absolutely pouring in. I told Ann within like 3 or 4 days of the surveys, I said, we're past 600. And then I called her and said, we're past 800. Then I called her, we're past 1,000. I mean, it's one of the best returns we've had for a survey in a long time. And the really good news for you guys also is you're paying exactly what you would have paid if it was 600 surveys. So we really feel great. So your original margin of error was going to be plus or minus 4%. Now, because of the great return, it's plus or minus 2.7%. And not only does that lower your overall margin of error, but that means that when you mine the information by various demographics, it's even richer. The data is even better statistically. And the results that we've broken this information down by the way, and it's in this little 800-pound book that, in the old days, we used to bring by about 15 copies of this. And, and then now is the days that we realize this is a half a tree. We don't do that. We do it green, but I did bring down 1 copy with me. In the old days also, I could carry about 5 of those, and today I could carry 1 with the help of my wife. But the results, we're going to break them down by the age of respondents. We also break down all the results based on households that have children and don't have children. We break it down by how long people have lived in the city of Edina. We've broken them down by the location of the residence. We broke it down by people who live within a 1-mile radius of Fred Richards Park and people who live within the rest of the community, just to see if there's any differences. We always do those breakdowns that way. Broke it down by gender and also broke it down by overall satisfaction with the value you received. It just shows had a really good distribution as far as by ages. We had a really good distribution as far as the age of respondent, years living in Edina, and quite frankly, in everything, the biggest thing is that there was more, which there always is, more women who returned the survey through mail than men. But quite frankly, because we had 1,200 surveys, even though men were a little bit less than 40%, it was still 200 surveys more than we would have had for men if it would have been 50% of 600. And this is just some examples of national clients. Our firm does all types of public research. So we do customer satisfaction surveys, and we do transportation surveys, we do transit surveys, we do surveys for comprehensive plans. But one of the special areas we've been involved with for about 20 years is surveys for park systems. So we've done about 700 surveys for park systems across the country. These are some examples of national clients. And what I did on this is I pulled out some communities that we've done work for that I think would be similar as far as demographically to Edina, like Malibu. And I do a lot of work in Chicago. Like I think Edina is a lot like Highland Park or like Northbrook or Winnetka. Communities on the North Shore. I'm from Chicago, and I would always consider when I came out here for Edina that it's very similar to some of the North Shore communities, and of course around the country. So we've done that, and then we could benchmark your results to national clients, and I've just brought 1 or 2 examples of how you benchmark against some of these other communities, just a couple. So let's talk about your system today. Really, bottom line up front. First, your usage of your parks and facilities is really high. You had 94% of your households had visited parks. That is really a big number. And 95% rate the conditions as excellent or good. But we're going to break those down of how many say excellent and how many say good. Because in my mind, that's even more important than just who say excellent and good. The city is a primary provider of outdoor and indoor recreation services in the community. And your very satisfied ratings with the overall value that you receive from parks and recreation services is high. And at the same time, there's opportunities for you to increase that overall value. And I think that if you listen to the results of what your citizens are telling you is important to them and their highest priorities, you're going to take a high rating or you're going to make it even higher. So let me just give you examples running through these charts. The first question we ask, and we always like to ask easy questions to start people off so that they really get interested in the survey. So the very first question on the survey is, have you visited a park in the city of Edina in the last year? Yes or no? 94% said yes. 88%, a couple things that are important, 88% or more of households with and without children visited parks and recreation facilities. So it's really across the board that you have high usage. Facilities that people use the most, well, playgrounds. One thing that you'll find when you go through the demographics is households with young kids, they dominate the playgrounds. I mean, you could talk about 70, 75% maybe be using playgrounds, where then you get to households with no kids, like mine, that are empty nesters, and it's like 5 or 6%, and they're taking their grandchildren with them when they go. The average, but you've got playgrounds, ponds, lakes, grassy areas. Those are the areas that the most people use, but the average household uses a little bit less than 6 facilities on that list. So when you say, what have you visited, the average household doesn't go to 1 thing or 2 things or 3 things, but they go to about 6 different things that they have on this list. And by the way, the national benchmarks for usage of facilities, parks, is about 72, 73%. So when you're at 94%, you're at like the top 5–6% of parks and recreation systems in the country. And it's a little bit more typical for a really good inner city, inner metro area suburb to have a little bit of a higher usage of their park system when they have the open space and things of this nature. Overall condition ratings are high. What do I base it on? I say, okay, you're at 41% excellent, 54% good. Now the national benchmark for excellence is 30%. So that makes you feel good to say, okay, well, we're at 41% excellent, and the national benchmark is 30%. But really, I think that the decision for the council, in a sense, is what's good enough. You know, it's like you've got 95% of people saying good or excellent. Is 41% saying excellent good enough? So I just pulled out, honestly, about a half an hour ago, just looking through this, and I said, okay, so when we asked that in Deerfield, Illinois, same exact question, it was 47% who said it was excellent. When we asked that in Winnetka, it was 43% who said excellent. So both of them right in your alley. Now when we asked in Palm Desert, California, 53% said excellent. When we asked in Northbrook, if you were going to say, okay, we want to know who's the best of the best of communities like us, Northbrook was 57%, said excellent. So really when you're looking at 43, if you said to Ann as a city council, if you said, Ann, this is totally unacceptable, 41% ain't going to cut it, we got to be 70% excellent, you could give her millions and millions of dollars, she's not going to get to 70% excellent. She'll lose her job before she gets to 70% excellent. But if you said it as a council, hey, you know, we want to get to the high 40s, you know, because we have that type of an image of our community. We want, you know, close to half the people to say, hey, we have an excellent condition of our park system. Your citizens are telling you exactly what to do in order to get to that 50%, you know. So, and that's always obviously a policy decision. I'm just going to give you the information on how you could get there, whether your goal is 41% to stay there, 45, or whatever it is. Participation in recreation programs. Now, you're at 32%. Actually, the national benchmark is 29. 59% of households who have kids under 10 participate in your programs, compared to 16% of households with only adults. Now, I didn't look at the benchmarks, but I will tell you that the best communities are about 60% participation in programs, the very, very best. And in the Illinois area, it's right around 40% as average. And one of the big things, and this is a discussion thing in the survey, is the better communities, the communities that have the highest participation, also generally have the best indoor facilities. And particularly when you get into cold weather communities, it's the case. So Chicago is one of the areas that has the highest participation. They have a lot of indoor facilities. Yes, ma'am.
When you're talking indoor facilities, are you telling me that they have an indoor athletic facility that's like a large athletic club to get that kind of 60% or more rating? Because we don't have anything particularly like that.
Well, one of the questions that you asked in the survey was about indoor facilities.
Yeah, wait till you get there.
Yeah. I'm just simply saying that that's one of the things that we find, that there's definitely a relationship, and that's not always the right relationship for a community. But where you're at right now is pretty much average. Now, when you look at participation, one thing I do like about your system is you've got about half the people who are participating in your programs participate in 2 to 3 programs. So again, you know, if you look as a business person might say, well, we got 26% of our people who are participating in 1 program. I would like, and you know, I'd like us to stay at about 30%, but I'd like to move about half those people who are only participating in 1 program to participating in 2 to 3. I'd like about half the people who are participating in 2 to 3 to move to 4 to 6. Does that make sense? So then you're really looking at getting more usage from the people who are already using you, much like a business person would say, hey, if you're eating my restaurant once a month, I'd like you to eat at my restaurant a couple times a month. And because you get good ratings, because people who use your programs like your programs, you should be able to move in that direction. So does that make sense? Okay, and that's the cheapest thing to do, quite frankly, is just to do a better job in regards to cross-marketing and things of this nature. Why do people go to programs right now? Well, we ask people, give us your top 3 choices, and it's really the location of the facility, have fun, friends participate, quality of the programs, improve health and fitness, learn a new skill, et cetera. By far, in every group, whether it's with children or not with children, location of where the facility is the #1 factor of whether they use it or not. Followed by have fun. And I will tell you, we've never asked have fun. I mean, all these other things are benchmarks, and across the country, location is the #1 reason. We've been doing this benchmark for about 10 years. And I thought when we started off that it would be, we have great instructors. I know that sometimes people thought it would be our fees are affordable. It's neither one. It's not what I thought, and it wasn't what other people. It's location. Just like in a business, location, location, location is really key to people. And then we asked them, okay, of those who participate in programs, only those who participate in programs, what do you think of the quality of the programs? And 39% said excellent. The national benchmark is 33%, so a little bit lower than in parks. Now, the highest we've ever seen as far as excellent ratings is about 55% for programs. So again, here, if you were going to say to Ann, you know, we'd like to get into the low to mid 40s, that's certainly doable. And particularly if you look at what your citizens have said is the important things to do. And we're going to get to some of those in a few minutes. Organizations. Many times people say, well, why are we doing this? Somebody else is doing it also. But the average citizen actually uses several organizations to do things. And they may use one organization for youth. They may use another organization for young adults. They may use another organization for older people. But when you look at what are the 2 top community providers, by far, it's the City of Edina and the Rivers Park District. Those are the 2, and they're pretty much equal. You know, we're looking at a margin of error is 2.5%, 2.7%. So you look at those 2, and they're by far the top ones, followed by the school district, state of Minnesota parks, private clubs. Now, I would tell you, private clubs at 36%, that's high. Now, you're more of a, you know, upper middle class, affluent community, so you're going to look at private clubs, but they rarely get any higher than in the 30s. So when you look at certain market rates then, if your market is higher than 40%, generally they won't be served by private clubs exclusively because their market penetration rates are in the 30%, even in communities this size. Same with like the YMCA at 23% of people who participate in Ys. That's about national average for those who participate in a YMCA. So you're capturing about the average amount of people. So you're doing a great job as far as capturing markets. Now, we asked then a follow-up in the survey, who do you use the most? If you have kids in your household between the ages of 0 and 11, who do you use the most? #1 is youth sports associations. And you can see that long blue line. That blue line is who do you use the most. And you can see it's very well divided here in Edina. It's youth sports associations, school districts, the City of Edina. Now, the youth sports associations work with the city as far as utilizing. So that's really a great partnership for you. You know, it's a super way because you're getting a lot of the bang for the buck. So in a sense, the youth sports associations can say, well, we partner with the City of Edina, that's both of us. And the City of Edina can say the same thing. So that's really good use of the bucks. And I think it's good also that people identify youth sports organizations. They know of that. But that's the #1, #2, #3. And you can see that's pretty wide margin over the next. Then when you get into older children, 12 to 17, it's almost always the case, schools is first. And then the youth sports organizations. And you could see with the youth sports organizations, that's like older kids, it's a little bit more competitive athletics. And generally when you get into kids that are about 12 to 17, you see them moving out of public recreation programs. That's the hardest group to program for, absolutely. And it's the ones where if the kids are really good athletes, boys or girls, they'll stay in competitive sports. If they're not, they may be great dancers, that they may be great singers, they may be something else, or they may be somebody who's just interested in a lot of things and they stay in recreational things. But that's the toughest age group to program for, no question about it, if they're not in something, really, really strongly. But the school district and youth sport and sports organizations are typically 1 and 2. What was interesting to me about for Edina is in many systems, it's when you get into people who are adults that they fall off as far as usage. Here, you're the #1 provider for both, you're the #1 provider by far for those who are ages 55 and older. So you can see you're in first, and then private fitness clubs is second, but there's a pretty wide margin. I would actually, although we put together the chart, I would say if you look at the grouping on the left, which says who's the biggest providers for adults 18 to 54, that long blue line for private clubs, it's longer blue line than the blue line for the city. So that's first choice. So I'd really say private clubs are the top provider, even though it's second there, because they have more first place. And then, so I would reverse those in that area, because I always put a little bit more weight, so we should have actually put that graph that way. But you can see that there's pretty much of a spread, City of Edina, private clubs, River Parks District. People who are 55 and older are generally into a lot of outdoor things also. And so you're going to see that the River Trails District is a really good district. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that that's, appearing quite a bit. How do you learn about activities? Well, in your case, you learn about the activities really 4 ways, and they really dominate. First, your directory, 60%, then from friends and neighbors, 59%, then newspaper articles, 52%, then the City of Edina website. The activity directory is a top way for households with kids and households that everybody's 55 and older. And that's a little surprising to people, but it's still here in Edina the top for households with kids. From friends and neighbors is a top way that adults 20 to 55 learn about things. Now, 69% of households with children under 10 learn about programs and activities through the website. Only compared to 29% of households without any kids, everybody's 55 and older. And so one of the biggest issues in parks and recreation systems, by the way, now, is people saying, do we need to invest as much money as we're investing in the brochures? Because of the websites. And the truth of the matter is, I would say probably that one of the most dangerous decisions you can make is to cut back on, and especially if you want trying to increase, and this is probably going to be the first little controversial thing I'll say, but that's a big decision. Anytime you cut back on paper right now, it's a big decision because web is really big for younger families, but you can see even in yours where 69% of young people, they're going to use the web, and that's really big, but it's much, much smaller for over 55. So in most communities, they're really looking and say, we're probably 5 years away from going paperless. There's some communities in Illinois that send out direct mail households, and they were doing it 3 times a year. Now they're doing it two times a year. But I think generally right now, even though there's a cost, it's probably money well spent, as far as, because you still look at, when we're going to look at barriers, that lack of knowledge is still a big barrier. It's the biggest barrier nationwide for people not participating in programs. And so it gets to this, which is, what impacts usage? And the #1 thing that impacts usage, we are too busy, which we say in the Midwest is really just a way of saying there's nothing else that interests me. That's a polite way of saying it. It's always #1. I mean, and you can see 43%, that means people who are really using parks are also saying that because they're not going to use parks more often. #2, though, is I do not know what is being offered. That's about 1 out of 4 people say that. Program facility not offered, too far from our residents. And then last, level of satisfaction with the overall value. You've got 35% of households saying that they're very satisfied with the overall value. In some ways, this is the most important question when you're looking at satisfaction levels, is where are you on that? Over 40% of households without children, all adults, say that they're very satisfied. This is the area really when you're saying where should be our target. Again, it's a policy decision, but there's a lot of communities that are between 40% and 45% very satisfied. When I was looking through my sheets a little bit ago, the highest community actually that I was looking at was Bloomington, Indiana, which is a really, really good park system. We've done about 5 surveys for them over the last 15 years. They were at 50%. And I think, you get up to 50%, that's really high. That is really high. And that would be very, very difficult for just about any city to get to, except for in a long, long period. But I don't think it would be at all difficult for you, quite frankly, to get into the high 30s or low 40s if those were goals. And that's really where the top systems are being right now.
I have a question on the
Sure.
slide.
On this one or the one before that?
Is there any difference between group programming versus individual programming? And would it be worthwhile to look at the facilities that the people who say they're too busy are using?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've got the information so that you could look at I think that probably the first thing that I would do would be to look at people who say that they're participating in one program. How do they answer this question? People who say they're participating in 2 to 3, how do they answer that question? To see if that's a factor, just being busy, if that's a factor in how often they do things. So I think that would be probably the first place I would start.
And there's sufficient data there to crosstab that kind of?
Oh yeah, because really to crosstab, let's say you want a margin of error plus or minus 8%, you need about 150 surveys. So you could easily crosstab. Let's say that you're looking at doing 300. That's plus or minus 5.8, and you could go into 4 different areas. I was telling Ann, by the way, if you want to know how many 1,200 surveys is, we did a survey for Los Angeles for their park system. It was 2,800 surveys. We did it for the state park system in Texas. It was 2,000 surveys. So 1,200 surveys in a community your size. You can bet this information is extremely, extremely accurate. Okay, so we got kind of the interesting things as far as today. You got a good system. As I said to Ann, would I say you're good to very good at everything. Are you great at anything? I'd say probably you have great usage of your parks. Great, I mean at 94%, that's great usage. But as far as rating, are you great as far as the excellent conditions of your facilities, excellent conditions of your quality of your programs, excellent value? You're good to real good, but you're not at the benchmarking communities if that's where you want to be. So this is your public's vision of where the public wants to be. Okay? So first is, they say needs are high for a number of facilities. So what does that mean? Well, one of the questions that we ask on the survey is we say, here's 26 different facilities. And if I could use, Scott, let me use you as an example, okay? All right, so you're getting the survey. Anybody, by the way, get the survey here in the room? Okay, so you get the survey and your household's filling it out and we say, do you have a need for walking and biking trails, yes or no? And your answer is no. Do you have a need for indoor fitness facilities, yes or no? Yes, okay. Do you have a need for picnic areas? No, okay. So every single question, there'd be about 26, you'd either say yes or no, that you have a need for those or you don't have a need for those. Hi, how are you? Good. We're just getting into actually we are. We're getting into the good part, which is your citizens' vision for the future. So when we ask that question, what do you have a need for? 85% of households say we have a need for walking and biking trails. 69% say nature trails. 56% say natural areas and wildlife habitats. 42% say indoor picnic areas. 41% say indoor fitness and exercise facilities. So those are the biggest needs, and I'm going to show you a chart on the rest of them. When we get into Fred Richards Park, and I know that that's a big issue facing you guys, and we also looked at the indoor center, when you look for the community as a whole and say, what are the spaces that you would use the most if they were developed at the park? In order, these are them. 54% of households say as one of the 4 spaces they would use the most often would be walking and hiking trails within the park itself. 53% said that one of the 4 places they would use the most often is walking and hiking trails that connect with regional trails, so outside. So trails, both in the park, to connect to a regional trail system, very important as far as usage. 20% say a state-of-the-art playground for the entire community. So something that's not just a neighborhood draw, but something that's a draw throughout the entire city. 19% say a small outdoor amphitheater for community concerts. 18% say a theme-based adventure play area, and 11% didn't choose anything. And one of the things you're going to see is 9%, basically, and we'll show that 9% are saying we're not going to use the park. 91% are saying that they would use the park at least a few times a year or so. So basically, that's your market there. Bottom line, I said 91% of respondent households throughout the city would use Fred Richards Park. So if you think about it from this standpoint, you've got 94% of households use your parks right now. 91% would use one park. I mean, that's a huge percent. You're a smaller community from a standpoint of your land mass. So when you get a larger community park, you're going to capture people who are using your system, already think you're doing a good job, if that's that 91%, if you develop what they say is the most important things to develop. So if you developed, XYZ and it's not on that list, it's not going to be that high of a usage. But this question comes after, okay, these are the things most important to us that we would use the most. 15% of households that say that they would use it several times per week. 18% said that they would use it once per week. One of the other ways that we divided this, we said, okay, is there a difference between people who live close to the park, how they would use it, and people who live farther away from the park, how they would use it? Well, 86% of respondents' households who live within 1 mile of Fred Richards Park would use the park if it was developed with the facilities most important. Now, here was what was interesting to me. 27% of people who live within 1 mile of the park said that they would use it several times per week, which is almost double the entire community. 14% say once per week. So between those two, the usage of the park is going to be greater for people who live closer to the park. Now at the same time, 91% citywide say they use the park. There's 5%. That means there's more people, there's about 14% of people who live within 1 mile of the park who said, I'm not going to use it at all. And I know there are some people who, that it's an issue that there's back and forth. So there's about 14% who say, I'm not going to use that park. But there's 86% who are saying, I'm going to use it. And there's 27%. So there's kind of double that amount of people who are saying, I'm going to use it several times a week. So one of the things that you always get in a survey, and I always counsel our clients on this, is nobody's wrong when they're filling out a survey. They're exactly right. That's their opinion. But sometimes, like if they come into a group and they say, I represent everybody and we all feel this way, well, it could be. It could be. I one time had a meeting, and when I was a director of Parks and Recreation in a community, there were 100 people in there, and they all said, I think Ron's stupid about this. Everybody who thinks Ron's stupid, stand up, and everybody in the room, including my wife, stood up, So, but the fact is they were all right. But we had done a survey, and what we found in this survey is those 100 people represented about 15% of the people in our community. And there was about 85% of people who felt differently. So hopefully a survey will be able to bring to you that everybody is right, but where do the majority of people feel? And the vast majority of people throughout the community will use this park, and the vast majority of people that live within 1 mile of the park would use this park if it was developed this way. And then bottom line, we also asked, and this was your question earlier, that if you develop some indoor recreation facilities, would people use it? And the ones that they would use the most is walking and jogging track. 47% of people said that would be in their top 4 choices. 27% exercise facilities, 20% weight room. We were looking at a space that you had Highway 100 and Vernon Avenue as a potential site for this indoor facility. A very high percentage of people said that they thought that was a good site. Now, we didn't ask questions about operating costs. We didn't ask questions about user fees, things of this nature. It was purely, would you use this type of facility if it was designed that way, and how supportive would you be of that site? So it's really macro level is what I'm saying. That answer. We don't go to the detail that we did at Fred Richards Park, which was really more micro level in what we did. So these questions, you can see households that have a need for recreation facilities. We asked 25 different types of facilities, and you can see right at the top, walking and biking trails, nature trails, natural areas, and wildlife habitats. So those are really high. We always like to look at it from a standpoint of how many households you have and how many people you're really talking about. So there was over 17,500 households that said we have a need for walking and biking trails. There were over 14,000 households who say we have a need for nature trails. There's over almost 6,000 households who say we have a need for soccer fields.
They were allowed to answer any of these, not just...
Any of them. Anyway, every single one of them was an individual thing, like, do you have a need for this? Yes, no. Do you have a need for this? Yes, no. And the average, I think the average is generally about 6 to 9 things people say they have a need for. So this is the first question. This is a series of 3 choices that people have. The second thing that we ask is, if you say you have a need, anybody here raise your hand and say, I have a need for walking and biking trails? Okay. So the second question we would ask, if I could ask you, is you said you have a need. When you're thinking of the trails that are available to you as an Edina resident, and we're not even just available to you, are your needs 100% being met, 75% being met, 50, 25, or 0? And your answer would be?
My answer probably would be half, because
50%.
not connected to the original trail yet.
Okay, 50%. So my thing is, let's say you said your needs are, you have a need, and your needs are 100% being met. So how many more trails does the city need to develop to meet his needs? 0, right? Because he's 100% satisfied right now. So we always look at, that's an important question. I think unmet needs is actually more important than needs, because that's really what do you need to do. So when we ask that question, here's the things that are kind of interesting. Let me shoot back and forth. So as an example, when we looked at, I'm going to go to hockey, indoor hockey and skating facilities. 21% said they had a need for that. Based on those 21%, the only people who will answer this question are in each case, like you answered, they say, I have a need. So of those 21% who said they had a need for hockey rinks, 52% said, my need's 100% being met. And then on down. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Just in general, when we look at this in communities, if you have 40% or more of people who said they have a need for something, who say their need is 100% being met, you're generally doing a really good job in that area. You're really generally meeting the needs. So you look at outdoor hockey rinks, you look at baseball and softball fields, you look at playground equipment, you look at outdoor tennis, football and lacrosse, outdoor swimming, water park, soccer. You're at 40% or higher in each one of those. So you're generally, doing a really good job in that for the people who have those needs. And then you get on the bottom, well, pickleball is something, as an example, that is really a big thing in Chicago. I don't know if that's, here. But you can see, of the people who have a need for pickleball, they're not very happy at all. So the next thing that we do, so I personally think unmet need is more important than need. Yes?
So can you go back to that slide? So if 40% is the threshold that we want to achieve to where we generally think we're doing okay, what's the lower threshold where people are unhappy or
Well, can you hold that for a second? Okay. Because here's something, and actually as I was looking through it, I said, this may be something you'd be interested in us doing. All right, so this is based upon the percentage of people who say they have a need times the percentage who say that their needs are 50% or less being met. So just as you said, there's 6,464 households in Edina who have a need for trails who say my needs are 50% or less being met. Does that make sense? So about 1 out of 4 households are saying my needs are unmet for trails. When you look at nature trails, it's about the same. When you look at indoor fitness, it's really high. You know, it's at 5,298, and that's because if you look at indoor fitness, you see where it is at the bottom here, 16%. So those who have a need for indoor fitness are not satisfied. And now that means, and this is really the key thing, it's not that their needs are not being met by the city, their needs are not being met in the community. Whether it's the Y, whether it's fitness, whatever it is, they're thinking only 16% of my needs are being met 100% by what we have available to residents. And that's really the key thing, is because we want to break down the boundaries of who's providing what. Because citizens generally don't care about that. They want everyone to work in partnerships like you are with the youth sports associations. That's what their expectations are. So you can see these are the biggest unmet needs, and they're mainly outdoor until you get to the indoor fitness, the indoor swimming pool. So those are needs, unmet needs. The next question is, in my mind, what's the most important? Because I said that the average person might say they have a need for 8, 9, 10 things. What's your number one most important thing? If the city could only do one thing, what should it do? So this is what 66% of people say that trails is one of the 4 most important things you could do. And almost 40% say it's the number one. So here's what that is saying to you. Really, I mean, bottom line, this is it, is you could make improvements to every other thing that's on this list, everything, in the next 10 years. And if you do not improve your trail system, your citizens will not be happy. I mean, that's bottom line. You could do every other thing on that list. And if you don't do anything about your walking and biking trails, there will be people upset.
Did you define why walking and biking trails is a sidewalk considered a walking trail?
You know, we just said in the survey, walking and biking trails. So people, you know, that's one of those questions where they have to determine that in their own mind. If they're happy, like walking on their own sidewalk in their street, and they feel that that's satisfactory to them, they may say, yeah, I'm 100% satisfied with that. So it's really, we have found over the years that's the easiest way at a macro level to define that. You know, if we had the room, if you knew that this was number one, we might have said, okay, let's define all the types of trails you could have and everything. But this is in a macro level. So you could really look at the, you know, how big the blue lines are. And so, you know, the blue lines, biggest for walking and biking trails, then nature trails, then natural areas, then 18-9 hole golf course. It's about 21%. That's about what you normally would see in a community. And I also look, by the way, at how long that blue line is, because the blue line represents intensity of feeling. Intensity of feeling is people who show up to council meetings, okay? Now, I am a passionate golfer, you know, so I am. But golfers is probably the biggest example of people who, you know, they have a long blue line, but less second, third, fourth choices. Because if you do it, you do it. It takes up a lot of time and things of this nature. I play a lot. I always look at the blue line is the passion for something. The red, yellow, and green is the depth of importance of something. You know, so you have to look at them both. Now, you asked the question earlier, you know, how you could do it. Actually, we didn't have this in the scope, and I'm interested in that. But one way of doing this is actually, we have this matrix that's called an importance unmet needs matrix. And it basically says, what's important, what's the biggest unmet needs? And so you really, as a city, what you want to do is you want to concentrate on things that are important, that you have low unmet needs, because that means you're doing a really good job. You know, so if you took off 24 of these things and put them in 4 quadrants, you could put a quadrant that's high unmet needs, low importance. That means a lot of people are complaining about it, but it's not that important to most people. So how much money do you want to put into that? So it's really not just that 14 or 15%. It's that 14 or 15% combined with how important it is. Does that make sense? So, as a council, what you want to do is in those areas that are very important to people and they're feeling you're doing a really good job, we consider that, keep it up. The things that are really important to people, but you're not doing as good of a job, those are opportunities for improvements. So if that's something you want, we could look at that. As far as Fred Richards Park, the first thing that we did is we looked at everything that has been considered for the vision of the park and said, okay, here's a full range of passive, active, self-directed program activities that could take place there. Are you very supportive, somewhat supportive, not supportive, or not sure? And you could see here where, interesting, Edina is obviously a community people have strong feelings about things. You don't have a lot of not sures. People, sometimes we'll have things like 35, 40% of people saying they're not sure. Here, they're pretty sure about what they think on things. So the long blue is, I'm very supportive of it. And then the next, somewhat supportive, is, the lighter color. What's always difficult in development and city council decisions, any business decisions, is you've got over half the things there that people are saying, I'm very supportive, or I'm somewhat supportive. So it's really, how do you do things? Now, when we started doing these surveys, we looked at this, and this is typically how people do surveys, and they say, gee, you got a lot of support for these things. We thought that was inadequate. And we feel like, therefore, you got to look at all those and say, okay, what would you use the most? What would you use second most? What would you use third? Because if you're going to build it, you got to operate it. And if you got to operate it, you got to pay for the operations of it. And you're going to pay for the operations of it easier if it things that people use a lot. And then you look at where do we direct tax dollars to, where do we direct operating fees to, et cetera. So when we asked that question, what would you use the most? We came back to, you said a minute ago, sir, I can't remember your name, I apologize. Scott, I apologize. You said it's not 100% because we're not connected to the regional system. Well, so when you said to people, what's your first choice? By far, the first choice at the park was, we need to be connected. You see that long blue line? That's 27% of people saying, that's what I would use the most, and that would be a great connection point for the regional system. And 54%, so right at those trails is 1, 2. So again, it would be silly if you're going to develop that trail, if you didn't put trails in that park, don't do the park. I mean, it would be, it's just not possible to do the park without the trails. That's the key thing. And it's really should be developed connected with other places. And it makes total sense, really, if you think about it just logically. You have a larger park, so you can have a larger area within the park to walk around, and then it connects to other things. So both experiences are good experiences. One day you may want a shorter walk, you may have your kids with you, you want to stay within the park. Another day you may have more time, you want to start there, drop off, you want to go someplace else. So we look there, then we look at the state-of-the-art playgrounds, small outdoor amphitheater, theme-based adventure, sitting areas, et cetera. You can see that there's active and passive facilities in this group. Based on here, I would say the higher percentage of the land, if it was developed, should be towards passive purposes, the higher percentage. Some sports and things of this nature, but the higher percentage for passive. Walking and biking trails, it didn't matter whether you've got kids or you don't have kids. Within the park and outside of the parks are the key things. But then you get into certain things that are different per demographic groups, like the theme-based adventure area. Only 19% of all households say that's one of the 4 most important things, but 47% of households with kids say it's one of the 4 most important things. So you really have to look at who's your audience is for various things. Now let me give you a few other examples. Households within 1 mile of the park, households in Edina more than 1 mile from the park. What do they think? Well, 53% of households who live within 1 mile of the park they indicated that trails within the park are one of the 4 things most important to them. 47% of people who lived, and not most important, excuse me, that they'd use the most. And there's a difference, that they'd use the most. 47% said that they would use trails connected with regional parks the most. Of people who live outside of that 1 mile radius, 55% said indicated trails as one of their top 4 things. 54% indicated trails connected to regional trails as one of their 4 most important things. What about households who had a need for golf course? Because I know that there is a golf course there now. What about those households? Well, people who said, yes, I have a need, because we took that question, do you have a need, et cetera. Of the people who said that they have a need for a golf course, 54% indicated they would use a trail within the park. And 56% indicated walking and biking trails. That's more than double how many said that golf is important to them, one of the 4 most important activities. Which really is, you're a golfer, you're still going to use this park. The vast majority of people who have a need for a golf are going to be using this park. And the biggest thing they're going to be using is trails. Now there's other things, and it's in the book because we have a chapter in the book simply on people who live close to the park, away from the park, people who have a need for golf who don't. And I simply bring it up because I hope that the survey is a way of building consensus. Like I said, because nobody is wrong. Honestly, it's like, what numbers do they represent? So, big numbers. I mean, these are huge numbers as far as visiting a park. So the last thing that we said is, okay, now you have designed a park. Architects hate when I say this, but we don't need an architect to design, sorry, and I know you guys, you don't really need an architect in the citizens' minds to design the park because your citizens have just designed that park, right? You need an architect or a landscape architect to put it in certain places. You do that, so I'm being a little facetious. You need that to put it in the right places. But as far as what it looks like in total, when you're done with the survey, you're telling the city, if I could design this perfect park, this is what it would look like. And that's better done without seeing a picture, by the way. I have a lot of times people say, well, should we show a picture? I said, no, don't show a picture. Let people show that picture in their own mind, what it looks like. Does that make sense? Just your own mind, what it looks like. And so this is what people have said that park should look like. They said, okay, so if it was developed that way, how often would you use it? Well, 41% of the households located within 1 mile of the park would use it at least weekly. If it had the features most important, 34% of households having a need for golf said that they would use it at least weekly. So, and I've met with the people, and I think it's pretty consistent with what you're looking at. The design, so the public's design, and they have public meetings, is pretty consistent with what you guys are looking at. All right, then the other big thing that came up, but this is more futuristic. One is a facility you're dealing with right now. The other is a facility that you may be dealing with in the future, and that's indoor programming space. Now remember, this is before we did the survey at all, whether we knew that there was any need for indoor space, but we found out that one of the biggest unmet need is for fitness. So one of the questions we said is, what are the spaces that you would use in? 58% walking and jogging track at the beginning. Exercise facilities for adults 50 and older. It kind of drops down. You have a lot of different things. Nobody going for a while, but we said, what would you use the most often? What 4 places? Walking and jogging track for sure. And generally I tell people today that if you have a number like this, it's like if you're going to build an indoor facility and you don't have an indoor jogging track, shouldn't even consider building it in Edina, because it's, people will be, upset about that right from the beginning. At least 39% of households with and without children indicated a walking and jogging track. 50% of households with children under 10 indicated a leisure pool, as compared to about 5% of households with kids with kids 55 and older, no kids. No kids, in other words, people like myself. Water is the biggest divide in indoor space, by the way. Households with young kids love leisure pools. Households with no kids, we use them, 3-4% of the people. They want lap lanes if they're going to have anything for water. 46% of households with only adults 55 and older indicated exercise facility for adults 50 and older. And one of the, sometimes people will say in the programs that you should ask a question that says, we want senior programs. And I always say, well, what is a senior program? it's so open-ended. But this is what's saying is senior fitness space, which is a little bit different. And then what percentage of people would be supportive of developing this space at Highway 100 and Vernon Avenue? Well, 51% very supportive. That's a big number to come out of the chute, especially when you're looking at 10% not sure. So you're looking at really 51, 61, about 3/4 of the people are saying very supportive or somewhat supportive. These are the types of numbers that would at least say that you might want to take the next step. You might want to take the next step at some time in the future of considering that. And I know it's not today on your board, but it's certainly something that you might look at, particularly when indoor facilities and an indoor pool were within the top 6 things that your citizens were saying, were part of their vision. And then last, funding the vision. And we asked people, if you had a budget of $100, how would you allocate those dollars? And you could see right at the top, it's your trails and you're improving your park and indoor facilities. And I'm just going to go to this because we had in here building new and we had maintaining. And what's very interesting, and it's always, is generally citizens in a community know that they've invested a lot of money in things that they have, and they want to make sure that those are maintained well. And so these numbers don't surprise me. I mean, your citizens are saying we have nice parks, we want to make sure that they're maintained. We have and improved. We have nice trails, we want to make sure they're maintained and improved. Same way with our sports facilities. So you're seeing those bigger things, and that's very, very typical, that you're going to have more dollars into maintaining than building new, and you don't have land acquisition in this question. So that's the survey results. Sure.
So out of $100, they would give $6 to create a new centrally located community gathering place. So that isn't an indoor. Describe that. Because
It's all we said, because here's the thing.
you said that there's a 51% interest in having indoor athletic facilities, but I don't see that on.
Indoor, there's a 51% interest in, if you're not indoor athletic, but indoor fitness, sports, aquatics, that combination. There's 51% of people who would be supportive of looking at that.
Really then ask the correlating question of $100, how much of that $100 would you be willing to use to support that kind of?
No, we did not. We did not, because,
I wish you had.
excuse me?
I wish you had.
Well, we asked maintain and improve indoor facilities, which is, a combination of that. We asked that, and in that amount, it came $13, which is,
Because we've had studies that say there's an interest in indoor athletic facilities, but then the next question on funding it, they're really never interested in completely funding it. How can we get public or private funding for this public amenity? And so, as you said, yes, I'll have to go the next.
well, there's also there's a difference. Here's a chart that really looks at what's inside. And so it depends on if you would consider athletic being, like a walking and jogging track, because there's huge interest in that.
Well, we're about to open a walking and jogging track that's
Right.
indoors, actually, in our soccer bubble. So, and that's indoors for the 6 months of the year that you need it indoors. So that indoor question might change, but one of the biggest issues when you look at building indoor facilities is we can bond to build anything we want to. It's trying to maintain something like that. So the question always is what is the appetite, for your residents to pay for the bonding? But then what is the appetite for that resident to pay for that continual maintenance? Because often those facilities don't break even. And you're trying to figure out a new roof 15 years down the road or whatever it is. So, but that didn't really get answered.
No, it didn't. And think of it this way. This is a survey that's about 6 pages in length, 6 to 7 pages. I do a lot of surveys that are feasibility study surveys just for, those are itself 7 pages
Oh,
long.
before you'd ever go to a referendum,
Yeah.
you'd do another survey
So
that would
just
give you an
unfortunate-
idea of, but,
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's just not enough room to, micro down. Oftentimes when we ask that question, by the way, we found that a decent way of asking it is to just say to people, here's 4 ways you could pay. You could pay either 100% of it should be from taxes, 100% of it from fees, mostly taxes, some fees, mostly fees, some taxes, and then not support anything. And we've asked that, and it's pretty interesting what people say.
sure, thanks.
You bet.
Anyone else want the microphone? Well, thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much for your attention.
What about the indoor?
Oh, wait, here, can I get you the microphone?
Were the indoor usage questions location specific? It seemed like some were and potentially some weren't.
Well, all of the questions were location specific as far as you've got maps that for every single respondent, you've got it mapped, that you could put into your GIS system. So every single question on the survey actually is geographically specific as far as the respondent itself.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about the indoor space. You asked the question, would you like an indoor athletic facility on the old public works site over here? Did you ask that question generally too, or just for that site?
That's the only site specific that we asked.
Okay. Now, we're building a new sports dome that will be open fairly soon. It's going to have indoor, as I recall, indoor walking and jogging track around the periphery of it, which should be a pretty significant amenity in line with what you're talking about here, indoors, but nonetheless providing that amenity. Would you suggest that once that's up and operating for 6 months or a year, that we resurvey the indoor walking, jogging need?
I would say maybe after a year to 2, and here's something that would be really inexpensive to do, quite frankly, is you've got 1,200 surveys. That means you've got 600 and some that said that people had a need for indoor facilities. You could just pull out those that's all random. You could just pull out those surveys of people who said that they had a need for indoor trails and see, that impact of that. Really short, it would be very, very inexpensive to do. And I agree, Mayor, I think that would be good. Generally, when people say, how often should you do these things, your needs and what's important should not change in the next 5 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. It really, what's important to people and needs should not change within the next 5 to 8. So if someone said, if you said to me, can we do this survey again in 2 years? I'd say you're really wasting your money as far as the changes on the needs. Now, what will change if you move forward is unmet needs and satisfaction. So the needs won't, the importance won't, but what you're saying, Mayor, that can change. If you do something dramatically different, the satisfaction levels can change, the unmet needs can change. And that's what you would, if you're going to concentrate on measuring every 2 or 3 years, that's
So if you had to summarize the top 3 to 5 needs from the work that you did, what would you say those were?
or the top 3 or 4 priority actions to take, or needs?
The needs.
Well, I'd say without question that attention to trails is usually.
Outdoor.
Excuse me?
Outdoor.
Well, both, but I would say right now, outdoor trails. Both, the connections is a huge thing for you all. I mean, it's huge. And so I think, and I had said this, I need this now? Yeah. Okay. If you did everything else in this, from this survey and didn't address outdoor trails and connectivity, It's more important, it's so important to do that. So every opportunity that you have to build trails is a good opportunity, and every opportunity that you have to connect trails is a good opportunity. So I'd say that's number one, and probably number one and number two. I'd say number three is number two, I think it's a kind of a policy decision on your side, and you weren't here when I said this, Mayor, but you have a good system as far as how you're maintaining your conditions and everything. You don't have a great system. That's a policy decision. And you'll have a greater, there's no question in my mind that if you embark upon more trails, and some of the things people are talking about in outdoor, just that in itself, if you were going to survey people as far as what they thought the conditions of their parks would be, it would be higher. They'd be more satisfied with them in 2-3 years because it's that important to them. So I'd say that would be two in my mind. As far as third, I do think that the new park is, I think if it's designed correctly, is going to get a tremendous amount of use. It's going to get a tremendous amount of use, and not without other, both close to the park and outside, with respect that there are people who won't. But if you're looking at for the greater community, yes, it'll definitely get use if it's designed, as accorded. I'd say that's number three. I'd probably say number four is, in the long run, if it fits into a greater economic thing, you should look at indoor facilities. But that's probably, several years away, but it seems that that's a part of a bigger economic development story. And then I think your parks, you got to stay on top of, you've got 94% of your households using your parks. That's a big number. So your park systems are important for this community. There's no question that it's important. And so I think just paying attention to that, that it's, I'll say it's not like something that people will, it would be nice to have. I think it's definitely an important feature. You can't have 94% of any people doing anything that's voluntary unless it's important. Because nobody's making them use any of those parks. And I guess if I could have a fifth, I think you got great partnerships with your sports associations. I have rarely seen youth sports as number one, as far as a provider. So I think any way that you can enhance that partnership that you have, as far as, proportionately with fields or improving whatever, I think would be great. So I'd say those 5 things are the biggest takeaways that I would have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Yeah, and I'm wondering, since you were the one that did the 2006 needs survey, I'm wondering if there's a way that we can evaluate how we're trending. Can we look at that? Is it valid to look at that, for example, in any of these measures that might have the questions that are similar and say,
We actually did that
oh, okay, good.
because I thought that would be important to do. So it's actually in this report. We did a trending of... we did a trending... I was looking to see if I could come up with it real quickly. Yeah. As an example, just a couple real quick. When we did this in 2006, we said, do you visit parks in Edina? 91% of people said yes. Today it was 94% said yes. Very, very close, trending. Now, when we said, what do you think of the overall condition of your parks? In 2006, 45% said excellent. This time, 41% said excellent. So the trending in fire, that's why I said it depends on what your goal is. If 41% is good enough, excellent, then you're there. And I think it may have been before you came in, Mayor, but I'm from Chicago, and I do a lot of work with the North Shore communities in Chicago. And when I see Edina, it reminds me of like Winnetka or Highland Park or Deerfield or Northbrook. And when you're looking at those communities, they're like mid-40s. Northbrook is 57% excellent. So I think your goals should be mid-40s to high 40s, and you were there 8 years ago, you're not there now. So that's a trending. When you look at your participation in your recreation programs, you were at 36%, now you're at 32. Now, I'm going to use the same word that I used when I was in Highland Park 10 years ago. You could have facilities, but are your facilities tired, or are they facilities where when people walk in, they go, wow, this is fantastic? You yourself would know that. It could have been that 8 years ago, people were more, wow, this is great, and now it's a little bit more tired than it, but again, pretty close. So we did do those trends, and I think you'll find them informative.
Do you remember what the margin of error was for?
When we did it before, the margin of error was plus or minus 4%, because we did 600, and now it's plus or minus 2.7. So if you're looking as an example, in a 45%, good question. You know, when we did that before, that could have been anywhere from 49% to 41.
Yeah.
Excellent. Today, it could be anywhere from 43 to 39.
Okay. I have another question. So for our we're going to come up with our strategic plan for park and recreation. So it'd be silly not to include the trails. But would it be helpful to understand better what residents mean by walking and biking trails, as well as maybe using cross tabulations to understand whether they're looking at trails closer to their homes versus getting in the car, like going to Fred Richards? How can we better understand what residents mean?
Well, I think a couple things, that since connectivity is so high, they're not really looking at something that's like in their backyard. They realize that connectivity with a regional system is something they have to travel to. So I think that the survey research is really showing the length of the trail is more important than how close it is. They'd much rather have a longer trail that's a little farther away than a shorter trail that's right next to them. I think that's fairly clear. When you look at barriers, I don't want to speak out of, but when you look at barriers, it says here, I'm trying to see, too far from our residents, 15% of people are saying that. So let's look at that benchmarked against our other communities. Okay, if you're higher or lower. And this is how you could use this. I mean, quite frankly, this is how I use it. It says, is this a big issue in Edina? Well, 15% of people said too far from our residents. And on a national basis, it is 12%. So you're about average when it comes to it. You're just about average. So I wouldn't say it's an overwhelming issue. You know, if you're looking at 12% as compared to 50-some% saying they you know, trails are important, and then you're looking into the design.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to get a handle on those indoor facilities, because it seemed, as I was hearing in the beginning of the presentation, it seemed fairly clear that a great number of residents would rate that as their top, in one of their top unmet needs. And I'm just trying to figure out if you could tell me a little bit more about that. How do we compare, as far as benchmarks, how do we compare to other communities like ourselves to in that area?
Well, if you look as an example of people who say they have a need for indoor fitness facilities, you're at 42%, national average is 46%. you're not that much different. Remember I said needs don't change that much? It's not the needs. You're not that much different. You know, and so look at this thing, because this chart is saying needs. Your biggest needs by far are walking and hiking trails, nature trails, natural areas. Not to lose sight of that. Those are your biggest needs. They're all outdoor related. It doesn't get to 42% until you get to indoor fitness. That's half of trails. Half of trails as far as a need. Where your problem is, or where your opportunity is it's unmet needs. So as far as people, of those 42% who say they have a need for indoor fitness, only 16% are saying my needs is 100% being met. Of the people who say they have a need for outdoor trails, as an example, well, there it gets into 26% are saying my needs are 100% being met. So it's really that unmet need is what's your opportunity to do something. And so then it gets into, you're still by far, trails are, you know, a quarter of your community is saying that they have an unmet needs for trails. So indoor facility, and if you look at indoor, it's indoor fitness, indoor swimming, indoor playgrounds, indoor basketball is 1,747. That's unmet needs. But you can pretty much look at how, on this chart, how indoor space compares to outdoor as far as priorities, because they're all together. So you've got, as far as indoor fitness, 14% saying it's in their top 4. Indoor swimming, 10% saying it's in their top 4. Indoor hockey, 9%. My point being that there's a need for it, there's an unmet need, there's a market for it, but it's not more than outdoor right now. I mean, I think it's not more than outdoor is by far more of a pressing thing for the majority of your citizens today when they're matched up head to head. Just based purely on this, because this makes everything that we had in there, 25 different facilities, indoor, outdoor, passive, active. Where are you?
Right, and I'm factoring in all of those other, how do you factor in the fact that we have a winter climate, and so all of the outdoor activities, for participation rates, when they say you're using the parks, in the summertime, how would you advise a park board to look at this holistically and say, okay,
Well,
certainly have to develop the trails. That's clear.
Well, this
But
is
then-
this is how I always advise my clients to look at it. The survey is a tool to help decision makers make better decisions. It doesn't make the decisions. So the mayor asked me, if you don't mind my saying, Mayor, you said what are the big 5 takeaways? So I said 5. Let's say you as elected officials said, and I said 5 based on what the citizens said. Now I think that it would be, if you guys just said, those 5, we're not going to do anything with those 5. I think that's like not doing a survey. You asked. Now if you said, hey, I think 4 things I'd kind of agree with that guy about, but there's one that I think wasn't as high, but I think we need to do it because, anecdotally, that's the way I feel. I think that's great. I mean, this is advice that you're getting from your citizens on priorities to help you make better decisions. If you discount, in my mind, if you take 80% of it and use that, and then use your discretion on 20%, that's great strategically. But if you discount 80% and use 20%, I don't think you're using the power of the survey. So that's the easiest way for me to say it to you. These people all live in your climate. So they made they said what they said based upon living here.
Well, if you take the trails part and you look right now at a road reconstruction project we have on Valley View right by Breaker, and then we got an email from someone who said there's this natural wooded area we all walk around. If you're going to build this sidewalk that you're going to build to connect everything, why don't we pave this one area? And I remember reading it and thinking, yeah. And now I think, okay, more trails. They want them closer to their homes because they don't want to have to drive. We don't have trails over on that side of 100 right now in that quadrant. Maybe that is something we should be looking at. So I think, it has a lot of value, and that's a road reconstruction project. It's not a park and rec. It's probably not even on your radar screen. You probably didn't even know there's a walking area through the woods there. But all of a sudden it says, here's an opportunity, it's closer. Maybe it's something we should look at. So it has a lot of interesting value.
Absolutely. And, I said something that I was kind of saying tongue-in-cheek as far as that people are the designers, which they are. But at the same time, the average citizen, if they're looking at like their neighborhood park, it's about 6 or 7 acres, they may say, I want to have a big trail in there. Well, it won't fit a big trail. So that's why you do need designers. I mean, they're designing in your head, but then you need to take it to the next level. And, so when you take it to the next level, I looked at if you want to have trails in a park, you could have a certain length trail in a 5-acre park. You could have another length trail in a 15-acre park. You could have a larger trail in an 80-acre park. And that's where a designer can help you, because a citizen is saying, this is my vision. And in a sense, what they're really saying is, you guys figure it out. Mm-hmm. We want trails, we want connectivity. You guys figure it out the best way and the least expensive way to us and make it happen. I think that's really what your citizens are saying to you. You have one opportunity that, that's on the table. They seem to indicate, hey, we would use that for those things. That's an opportunity that would work for us. I think they're saying in indoor, we didn't test other locations. They're simply saying that's a location that we think you might want to look at this a little bit further. There may be better locations. I don't know. I don't know your community that well. But I would totally agree with you. And I think those are the types of things that, citizens won't have that knowledge, but that seems to me like it's a win-win, because you're knocking off more than one thing by doing the other thing. Other questions?
Thank you.
Well, I would just say, I loved coming out to, I mean, seriously, this was one of my favorite jobs. And when John was here, when we were looking through this, I think he was celebrating like his 30th wedding anniversary or something, because I had this little note, like, congratulations. I really loved coming out to Edina before, and I was really excited again, and I appreciate all your time. I know you've been very generous with it, so thank you.
Thank you.